Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. And this is going to be a rip-roaring show, because who do you love? That's right, you love us. We're jumping into an alternate dystopian future and another... As you know, have we done Arnie before? I'm trying to think what we've done. I don't know if we've done an Arnie.
I don't know either.
No, this may be our first Arnie. We are doing The Running Man from 1987. I'm going to quickly run through the cast, because the cast actually is quite interesting, because I'm going to mention them. We've got Arnold, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Maria Conchita Alonso, Yaphet Kotto, who I actually kind of like seeing, Jesse Ventura, and I'm trying to sort of bring up Professor Toru Tanaka, who I always like talking about. Fleetwood Mac, just throwing another weird ones out here. And Richard Dawson is an interesting addition to the cast as well as Damon Killian. I always want to note that I love the fact that they got an actor / game show host to play this vile sort of smarmy game show host. So it was a great stroke of genius.
And he's great in the role.
Oh yeah, he's fantastic. He's absolutely wonderful as Killian. This was written by Stephen E. D'Souza, based on the novel or sort of novella written by Stephen King under the name Richard Bachman, The Running Man, and it was directed by Paul Michael Glazer, better known as Starsky out of Starsky and Hutch. A couple of points I just want to highlight on that. So Paul Michael Glazer was brought in as a replacement when the first director, whose name I forget, got a week behind schedule within the first week. And so, yeah, they kicked him off and brought in Paul Michael Glazer. And Arnie was not happy because they had this idea of what the film was going to be, and how it was all going to look, and how it was going to have sort of like way darker sort of commentary and sort of all these bits and pieces, probably a lot closer to RoboCop, that came out the same year. But Paul Michael Glazer wanted to lean into the action and some of the visuals a bit more. And Arnie was a bit less pleased. He wanted this to be a bit more of a serious film. He was trying to sort of, do some serious sci-fi, I think, that away from the stuff he'd done before. So there was some disputes about it on set.
Yeah, apparently Andrew Davis was the director who was fired.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think there are remnants of that RoboCop dynamic. You definitely feel, but it's a very inconsistent film, I think, from start to finish. It has those RoboCop moments that are really fun and definitely feel very RoboCop. There's a lot of Verhoeven touches in this. But then there's stuff that feels like this is a straight up action movie, that sort of hasn't found its feet yet.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of it wants to be that dark dystopian science fiction film, but it also wants to be a big Arnie hit. Sort of following up on Commando that came up sort of, in 85. And obviously Predator came out the same year as this as well. And so, yeah, Arnie was looking to try and do something different. But I don't know, I've read the novel. I should sort of highlight that. So the novel is very different to this. The novel is incredibly dark. Ben Richards is probably described, and Stephen King described him. If he was to cast him, it would have been Michael Biehn.
Yeah.
Would be sort of his Ben Richards, and it's more a case of a person is let out into the world. They are literally just let off, and the idea is they have to stay. The longer they stay out, the more they win, the more money they win, and the basically like as a viewer, if you see them, you can sort of ring in or call in or send in information, and sort of like then the stalkers, whatever similar things, are sent out to track them down, and that's the sort of the show. And the runners,
cool.
yeah, the runners have to send in a video diary every week, and in the book, like Richard starts off kind of serious. He starts sort of like saying about how disgusted he is about the system, and then by like the fourth week, it's just he just sits in front of the camera with a pillowcase over his head, just to, because all he's got to do is send in a video. He's never told to do content, so he's just there to make it as boring as possible, because he realizes that by being angry, he's given them what they want. And all this element of lying about them twisting in the film, how they sort of twist the narrative and tell false lies, that's all actually in the book. And you find out that what happens to his wife, and he doesn't bring down the network in a similarly heroic way, but it ends in a it's very good. I really love the book, and I haven't read it for a while, so I might actually end up reading it again next year. But there's a great film there to have. But I like the fact that this does lean into that sort of Verhoeven-esque thing with the sort of the adverts and the other TV shows and the way that sort of people are treated on screen and stuff.
Yeah, and those the advertisements, the other TV shows, and this sort of like over the top aspects of it. I mean, these are all, I think, the best parts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at stuff in the background, and there's a poster for the Hate Boat.
Yeah.
Just like it's not very clever, but it's fun. It's very proto Verhoeven. And I think, I mean, so to me, what I remember about The Running Man is obviously, Schwarzenegger running. And maybe someday we'll get the proper adaptation, right? A more faithful adaptation. It'll probably happen one of these days. But I remember, the sort of like, this was a time where we didn't have a lot of superhero movies, and we've got like, Sub-Zero, not pre-Mortal Kombat, like we've got guys in costume who look silly, but who have gimmicks, crazy, stupid gimmicks, with like a car that they're driving and stuff, and an exploding puck for Sub-Zero.
Yes.
Like, I mean, it's all totally over the top. It's campy, but in this violent way. And Schwarzenegger is just flat out killing people, in this campy environment, which is, again, very RoboCop, very, Total Recall later. This is still sort of that early Arnie stage where it still feels like it's not quite the classic Arnold Schwarzenegger that I love, but it's a lot closer than like Commando, which just feels like, such a rough draft. But anyway, my point is, like, I remember all that stuff, and you think in a movie that has that, where that's clearly the selling point, is, this whole thing is a gimmick to get Arnold in a situation where you just throw supervillains at him, basically.
Yeah.
Why is there 30 minutes before that is like the most confusing 30 minutes I've ever seen in a movie that doesn't involve time travel?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've thought of this in the past about the sort of the structure of this film, and it is determined to do several things. And so because I have thought about this before, because you say the gimmick, the point of this film is the running section, is the game show, which is really only the last sort of third. It becomes, not so much the climax, but it's sort of, there's a short middle bit on the run, and then being taken, then it sort of kicks off. All this from it should be compacted, but they have several things that they want to do. You have the Bakersfield, massacre at the start of the film. So you are putting everything into context about who Arnie is, and he's actually the good guy. And although he's a cop or whatever, he's the good guy. You then get the escape for two reasons. The escape, again, is to show how skilled he is. They're looking to show that he can handle a gun and handle himself. And also, you want the scene where he's carrying a girder around. They're like, right, he's going to be in a latex suit, or not latex, sort of like a spandex suit for most of this. We need to get the muscles really on show. So let's have him carrying an iron girder around. It worked pretty well for the start of Commando. And like I say, they're looking for him to be fighty Arnie at the start of the film, because it's an Arnie film, and I think this is the point, isn't it? And then you've got they sort of get into the plot, about how they sort of fuel the show. Because
I had thought about, like, they need to introduce those two other guys, and the girl, right? I mean, for them to be in the plot later. But you're telling me that, like, getting Arnold to show his muscles was, as important.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Like, that's the reason. Like, if you see Arnie at this period in his career, his selling point is his body. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, you've seen, if the opening of Commando for Arnie, Arnie is introduced carrying a tree, like a massive tree. Beyond that, you've got, at the same year, you have Predator, which came out just before this, and it has the sort of the major scene is him and Carl Weathers sort of doing the in the air arm wrestle, where it's all bulging biceps and it's all major testosterone and stuff. If they'd have kept his physique and everything hidden in this, because don't forget, there's a line in this that Killian actually says. He says, "I'll get a ratings boost. We'll get at least 4 points for each of the biceps," kind of thing. Like, they're clearly building on the fact that he's such a big guy. But then when he gets on the yellow and blue suit, like, it's all kind of hidden because it's also in the suit. So it's totally there. That's the selling point, is the Arniness of this, which is why I think it's changed.
I still don't really understand this. I mean, and I looked and it was like around 30 minutes where he is being, walked to the Running Man set, right?
Yeah.
And it's, clocks in at like around an hour and a half. So, like, basically that whole first act, which, as you say, has two whole parts to it, strikes me as entirely unnecessary. You could change his costume. I know, I mean, it's early in the episode for us to be doing our rewriting thing, but, if you want him to show off his physique, change the spandex costume and say, "Oh no, it ripped," or
arms out,
bind a wound that tears the shirt off, like, "I'll save you, we bind the wound," I can't do the accent. And then, ripping those muscles.
100%. 100%. That's oh no, I agree.
The other thing I totally do not understand is the massacre at the beginning. And besides, this dystopian state is like the most incompetent, dysfunctional dystopian state I've ever seen on film. The massacre, it's like, I like that it lies and whatever, but it's just like, yeah, kill those civilians. We'll just lie about it later. Like, there's no attempt to even contact the victim of his, attempt to flee, to like get the story straight. Like, don't tell anyone. She's just like got to find it out on TV. I mean, okay, so I'm nitpicking, but that whole massacre, you're going to show 2 more times in the movie. Just don't show it. Start us off with the Running Man, and we don't know if he's guilty or not. But then, I know what you're saying. Like, we want Arnold to be the hero, so they don't want to do that and have the revelation. Like, no, I really was innocent.
Well, this is still the other thing to highlight as well is this is only really, I mean, he'd done Raw Deal, which is a dreadful film, but like, of his big hits, this is only his like fourth. Well, he's doing Conan, but moving away from fantasy, like, he then done the Terminator, and he was so determined to not be seen as the villain. I'm not saying it was in his contract, but he was like, no, I've got to be shown as the hero. That's what I want to be. I've got to be, as you said, that superhero character. I mean, you see this with other, action stars who are always doing this, where they've got to be seen a specific way. And it's not until later in their career where they feel comfortable. They're like, oh no, I can do something a bit more nuanced or complex, or I can play the baddie or whatever now. And Arnie was very much in this period. It's like, oh no, I've got to be the biggest star, and you be the biggest star by being the biggest hero. And you're right, but and then also the satire or the some of the messaging in this film isn't subtle. Like, yeah, like, the media lies is basically a message that this is going to smash you in the face with repeatedly. But it feels prescient. I mean, some of this feels really sort of like, it shows sort of how long sort of like that mistrust of news media and entertainment media has been about. This film's 87, and it still feels like this film is saying something now. But it feeds that narrative. However, I also think there's little bits that are kind of funny. Whether they're clever is a different story. But like this whole thing about you've said it before about what do they call it, circuses and
bread and circuses.
Like that's the whole point.
Yeah, that's explicit here.
Yeah, like they actually say, literally say it. Like if you want me, Killian actually has this conversation with the State Department saying that, well, if you want them distracted and watching television, you give me these people. And so I like that it is actually like it's almost literal, but he also gets, instead of getting like a state or like a what do they call it, like a state attorney, he gets a state appointed agent.
I thought that was clever.
Yeah, so there's little bits in like that I think are kind of funny, that sort of like, it's all part, but again, you don't get to see the wider world. We don't really know the difference between the haves and have-nots. Like you see these sort of things. But when we've said this about this is the problem with a lot of dystopian things. It sort of tells you just enough for you to be interested, but then doesn't expand for you to be able to sort of go, oh, okay, actually, on the whole, this is really bad, or actually, it's working. Like, what is it that the State Department and the government are actually doing that they don't want people to know about? But
well, in terms of how this is prescient, I mean, I think the rise of reality TV, right, and this is not the first movie to do that, but obviously that is prescient, and then the haves and have-nots, right, the sort of disparity between food riots and people living comfortably in skyscrapers, right? They could do more of that, right? We never have if this is an upstairs downstairs movie, we never have the downstairs, right? But except shooting them from above, right? Literally.
Yeah.
But we never really get the downstairs. And a little bit of that would have helped us to understand why the rebels are fighting so much. But having said that, that's okay. I don't think this is meant to be a big social commentary. It has those things. I think the media lies stuff can be clever, but it also, I mean, we're in a sort of like post QAnon environment where I'm like, yeah, the government lies about stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. If the U.S. reports what happened in a military maneuver, or the police report what happens in a police encounter, there's a decent chance, there's a solid 50% chance that's a lie, but that's very different from like civilian government ministers just whole scale making stuff up and saying a terrorist attack never happened, and this kind of stuff that you see in movies sometimes, and you think, oh, it was a gas leak. They saw Cobra Commander going through the streets, like I don't think anyone's going to buy this.
Don't forget, in this, they don't deny the attack. The attack happened. It's who they're blaming for it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the thing. And again, but then you're like, right, well, why you have to do this? Because that sounds like it's a bad thing, but you're looking for a scapegoat. And so, like, Ben Richards becomes that scapegoat.
I did think of the My Lai massacre, and and to give the film some points. It is true that when we have covered up massacres, routinely the person who ratted out the massacre, or the person who filmed the cops, is the one who gets the worst sentence than the people doing the massacre. and that happens again and again over here. And there may have been, especially given the year, there may have been some post-Vietnam My Lai sort of thought to this massacre.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's that's clearly there as a point they're trying to make, isn't it? That sort of like the film goes to the extreme. I mean, the film sort of it's camp in that truest sense of the word, in that like it knows it's silly and sort of embraces that silliness, but isn't entirely. One of the things I think this comes from the direction in some cases, that there is some performances in this, including like Richard Dawson and Arnie, but also like Jesse Ventura. You've got like Dynamo, sort of like singing opera and all glowing and other stuff. And it's all very camp. It knows what it is. I mean, this is the 87. This is the era of Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior in the WWF. As American Gladiator started at this point, this is
No, I loved American Gladiators, but that was in fact sold based on footage from this movie. And the idea, no, seriously, the people sold it to the network going like, the Running Man, we're gonna do that, but not with murder. That's how they made American Gladiators.
Wow, an excellent legacy for this film.
I think so too.
But it shows. I mean, that's the thing. It shows that there's that. This has tapped into something that, like, we're looking for that camp, that sign of entertainment. But and as I've said about sort of, this is the idea of Hulk Hogan, and obviously this has got Toru Tanaka, who was a wrestler, in this, and it sort of fits into all that kind of show and pomp and pageantry. However, the direction often feels really flat to me. Like, at no point does it ever feel like this is the kind of thing where I'll be expecting, if you had like a really sort of like, you and I have different, we have an opinion of like Michael Bay and Zack Snyder, these sort of very sort of visual storytellers that sort of, the story's not always strong and some, so whatever, but like they'll give you something, there'll be a visual flair or something that'll they're known for. This never really has that. It just feels very sort of like, it feels like we're filming something in a studio. Like it.
Yeah, you're right about that. It does feel oddly contained.
Yes, it never feels expansive or anything. Like, and even some of the sets you get, like when they're out in the zone or whatever, when they're in sort of Sub-Zero's ice hockey area and those other things. Like, I don't know. It just feels like the shots feel very sort of like, here. I mean, at one point, one of the things I was curious about is when they go into Sub-Zero's ice hockey area, I think it's in there, you see all these lights, elevating and twisting around on these big, but next to the lights is a seating area where it clearly is for a technician at some point in 80s technology. So I'm thinking, like, you've got all this on set, this big lighting rig that does all this other stuff. Cool, attach a camera to it and do something cool with it. Like, everything's very static and very, I've stuck the camera here, like it never feels like anything's moving.
Yeah, show us the footage that they would be seeing from these dynamic angles, right?
Yeah, that's it. And so the film itself feels kind of flat at times, which is I've always sort of felt that. But that's I think that's down to Paul Michael Grazer. Like, I don't think he is, he's not like an auteur. He sounds like a bit of he's an actor that did directing. But yeah, I don't know. It just feels like an odd one. This is another one where, like, if you handed this to a Verhoeven,
oh yeah,
like this is a sort of this could have been a step between. Well, this came out the same year as RoboCop, but like this is a step between RoboCop and Starship Troopers.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a better version of this movie that is more sort of RoboCop Total Recall. But what I like about this movie is that element. It is the sort of like over the top. It is the remembering that wrestling stuff. Because I was a fan too. I know you're a bigger fan, but I was an '80s kid, and I remember the Hulk Hogan animated series, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, the whole dynamic of the goodies and the baddies and costumes. I mean, it goes back to superheroes, and um, I was primed to like this. I love it's so classic '80s, the mix of that
Mm.
campiness with violence.
Yes.
Um, that's so uniquely '80s and early '90s. And it's such a wonderful vibe. But I always come back to, like, I want, like, that dance number that sort of serves as the transition from the first act to the second act
Mm.
is so long and terribly choreographed. Um, Despite it was apparently Paula Abdul
Yes, I was going to say it's Paula
choreographed.
Abdul. Yeah.
It's terrible, and
Yeah.
I mean, it's really awful. And I mean, it looks like, did you think Flashdance was too good? Like, you want something super retro, painfully retro, um, and just very repetitive. But anyway, it goes on forever. Like, we paid her good money. We're gonna show this.
Yeah.
That should have been like the title sequence, and then you do more of the Running Man, like, and now these messages, more of that stuff that you and I like from RoboCop.
Mm.
And this is just a brilliant movie that you and I would just be like, this is a classic. It's very close to being that, but
Yeah. I agree.
yeah.
Because I think one of the things that's interesting about this is there's a confidence going on, I think, with the performers. There's a comfortableness with this. I mean, Richard Dawson as Damon Killian is wonderfully slimy, and he's there's a great scene I really enjoy. He bumps into a guy who's like a janitor who's just doing the mopping, and he's able to be all sort of like friendly and stuff, like, you're doing a great job, you're doing a great, I see every morning you're doing a fantastic job, and the guy's like, oh, thank you very much. And again, the moment he gets in the lift, it's like, if he's still mopping up at the end of the day, you're mopping up for the rest of the week. Like, the instant sort of like two-facedness of it. Like, he's brilliant as this character. Like, I really enjoy him on screen. And all the others, I think, forget. Like, I always like Yaphet Kotto. I think I'm actually kind of like, I think he's great when he appears in things. But the guys playing the stalkers, like you say, the Sub-Zero, Dynamo,
Fireball.
Buzzsaw, Fireball, like, yeah, they're all great. Fireball probably less so a little bit. He's a bit naff, but like Buzzsaw is clearly my favorite. But again, that going back to that campiness, like, someone's told them, like, you're going to do this. This is how we're going with this. Like, and I went back to, I don't know if I shared it on the show, but obviously we mentioned there's a scene at the beginning of this where they're meeting Buzzsaw at the front of the studio for the film, and he walks in and just sort of slams a guy in the face, and the guy's like, "Oh my god, he touched me!" And that obviously being I actually think it wasn't. I thought it was Greg Valentine. It wasn't. It was Harley Race that apparently did it. But that being like, going back to this wrestling thing of, like, this adulation and ideology of these characters. But they're all having a whale of a time. Like, it's clear, and even Arnie is. There's more one-liners and bad puns in this than any of those other Arnie films. Sort of like cutting Buzzsaw in two. He had to split, and
yeah, some of them are okay. Some of them are painful.
But
You say until I would say until Batman and Robin. There is a Batman and Robin vibe to this.
I agree,
and I mean that in a good way. I think that's I think those Schumacher Batmans are underrated, and they are what they are. But they're not great. But
I like the first
they're
one.
doing what they're doing.
I like Batman Forever. Can't stand Batman Robin. But again, like, Schumacher's a good example. Schumacher would have been great for this.
Yes, absolutely.
I think Schumacher brings that right level of sort of like camp, and would have completely understood what this is, and I think would have been fantastic for this.
Yes.
And that's the thing. Like I keep watching this again, and Jesse Ventura is good as well. Like the whole advert at the beginning is Captain Freedom's workout, and it's just him sort of like
Yeah.
people doing stuff, but him sort of posing. And he's like, no pain, no gain, ha! And it's like doing. Like, I'm loving all that. Like everything that's being done is great. Like I'm really enjoying it. But as you say, it's sort of like we've said this about a couple of things recently. Like there's just a couple of notches away from being like fantastic sort of satirical science fiction. Like, be bloody, be campy, and be cutting. And oh yeah, you are in the same league as RoboCop.
No, I agree. Like I want to get back to this idea of be bloody.
Yeah.
Because this movie, can't quite decide what it wants to be, and I think you pointed out the sort of tensions between the action and the campy RoboCop-esque farce, or satire. And obviously we both are on the side of the RoboCop-esque satire.
Yeah.
So Arnie starts the film, and you obviously the history here. You're quite right. As needing to be the hero, needing to be like, I'm not going to do that. Like, I won't fire on these unarmed civilians. They just want food. This sort of ridiculous, over the top. Shoot those rioters. This is not the way despotic regimes work, right? But it is this sort of over the top thing. And none of that works. But the point is he doesn't want to be a hero. He doesn't want to join the underground. And he's willing to kind of toss around his female hostage a little, but
Yeah.
not too much, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of cruel to her, but not overly. He still doesn't seem like a villain. And then he spends the rest of the movie slaughtering people comically with no compunction whatsoever. And I kept thinking, like, you're on camera, clearly grinning side to side as you chainsaw a guy's dick. Like, you are not making your case like, I'm innocent, trust me. As you do something that would make Jeffrey Dahmer blush.
They tried to draw a line, which I think is quite interesting, because it's sort of like, he chokes out Sub-Zero with barbed wire, and you get the first terrible pun. And then obviously he takes on Buzzsaw and cuts him in half. And I get a good pun. I still like it when he had to split. But yeah, then you have the thing of Dynamo being trapped in his car. And it's that line of like, but I won't kill a helpless human being, no matter how awful you are. I won't, killing Buzzsaw was fine. It was in combat, sort of thing. Like, this is trying to draw that line, and this is interesting because I think we will come to this again. It was something that I've been thinking about, but it comes up with this, and when we talk about Battle Royale, but there's a lot of films that try to sort of have this message of. There was another film that Stone Cold Steve Austin did, which the name of it escapes me right now. Oh, The Condemned. Sorry, it was called The Condemned. It was very much the same as like Battle Royale, where people get thrown onto an island, and then the last man standing is the winner, and so on and so forth, gets their freedom. But it's being betted on and being watched by a bunch of super rich people. And so the message is sort of like, oh, well, this is awful, sort of making people fight against each other, and people, the voyeuristic nature of watching violence. But you're also selling this film on the fact that it's full of violence, and that's what people want to see. And that's also the slight problem with this film, in that they're trying to portray this notion of how awful and violent the regime is, yet you've got to show how strong and violent and everything the hero is as well. But then you've got to show a line, and it's like you say, does that line work, or does it muddy its own message?
Well, that problem, I think this is an important question, right? That problem has two sides. One is character, sort of in-universe consistency, and one is sort of satirical consistency. So the kind of like meta function.
Mhm.
So on the satirical meta function, like that's true of RoboCop too, right? I mean, like RoboCop is, um, you know, satirizing a violent world, a
Mm.
world in which violence seems out of control, and yet giving you that violence to enjoy, right? I mean, it's true of, I mean, my theory that, one of the central catharses that we experience in the horror movie or the serial killer movie is getting to enjoy murdering people, torturing them, and then feeling morally superior from what we are enjoying, and feeling glad that the killer got caught at the end and order has been restored. But in fact, we watched that murder sequence. We in Psycho, we are the murderers, right? We
100%.
connected
Yeah.
those shots. You had something to say?
This comes down to, um, and you're right about horror films, but it also is in action films, specifically certain types of action films, is the sort of the joy to be taken in the act of violence. But it's about who again, you said about the in-universe consistency, but it's about the victim of the violence being worse than the hero in some way. I mean, this goes back to, people in the arena with the Romans. Like, we're happy to see these people fight because they're not us. And people being stood around and watching an execution, like someone hung, and then buying pieces of the rope, money for old rope. That thing of sort of reveling in the violence, but feeling morally superior because I haven't committed the act, but also the person that the act was committed upon was either a terrible person, or they're an other, or they deserve it, or whatever. So you can stand
Right.
yourself aside from it. That's what they're trying to do with this, but wholeheartedly.
Well, but I think we can make that separation of those two levels, and I think that
Yeah.
on that meta level, that might be inherent to any sort of depiction of something that's being satirized,
Mm.
and yet is inherently entertaining. I mean, one of possibly my favorite film is Natural Born Killers,
Mm.
which is uh, brilliant criticism of media culture and violence in the media and the way we make killers into celebrities, and yet you absolutely love the main characters who are killing people in the most entertaining ways possible.
Yeah.
And that dynamic implicating you and the film in that, is also seems very 80s and 90s to me. We were a little more comfortable with doing that in, sort of Total Recall and movies like this, Starship
Well,
Troopers.
yeah, it tailed off in the 90s. I think there's two elements to sort of touch on. I think part of it is, for want of a better phrase, the cartooniness of the
Mm.
violence, especially if you refer to Natural Born Killers. But even this, like, they are introducing a
Hmm.
cartoon level of violence, like to some extent, like Tom and Jerry sort of, levels where you're sort of like, oh, it doesn't feel real, it's so ridiculous, like. And that is where you get to the point with like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees and that sort of thing, where you're thrilling in the inventiveness of the kills, not the violence. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the moment you make it real, like, if it looks too real, everything, it people struggle with it because it's a bit too much. So that's the one point, is the cartooniness nature of it. I forgot what the other point I was going to make was now.
Well, and in fact, in my notes, I have, this one of the best things that can be said about this movie, and especially the stuff that we like, the Running Man sequence of the Running Man,
Mm,
is that it feels like a live action cartoon. And
yes.
frankly, not a lot of movies by this time have managed to do that in live action.
Mm. And I think this is the thing, actually. This period, sort of like the late 80s and early 90s, seemed to embrace something, like you say, where, we take things a bit too serious now. And so if you're going to, they feel like, oh, if you're going to make a live action cartoon, it's got to be, you've got to elevate it and do this and do that with it. And I'm like, all right, I really like the 1990 Ninja Turtles movie. I think it's great.
Yeah.
You need that, you need the element of silliness to it, I think, to be able to enjoy it. and almost like in order to suspend your disbelief, it needs to be a live action cartoon, as you say.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so I mean, I'm comfortable with the sort of like meta level in which this violence is being criticized, and being satirized, and yet being sold to me, right?
mhm.
And I think you're right. It has this sort of over the top element that we don't get sort of post Saw, as often, or post Hostel. Um, but then this way in which, like, in universe, you're right, they want to draw these lines where Arnie is not going to kill people who are innocent or unarmed, and I mean, I will say it's consistent in drawing that line, but it's utterly, a failure to me in its ability to do so. In the same way that, like, every time I watch the Nolan films and say, like, yeah, I don't kill, but I drop people from skyscrapers,
Yeah,
and break their legs, I mean, yeah, at that point it's a distinction without a difference, I mean, you're endangering people left and right. So I mean, here, I mean, he is so obviously, with the puns and with his expressions, he's so obviously enjoying slaughtering people in cartoonish ways. Um, that to then pull back and say, like, but it's wrong to kill innocents. I mean, you could kind of do it, but I don't know. It doesn't work for me. I think the first third of the movie spent so much time trying to sell him as sort of like the fugitive,
mhm.
as an innocent man who's been framed and is going to go on the run, that um having him be so obviously, like, if his character isn't erect when he's performing these murders, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, that's how the film ends, with him going off with. That's what happens. He's like, yeah, when he goes off with Amber at the end of the film, he's just like, there's been slaughter everywhere. He's like, I'm so horny. That's just it now. Um,
Well, nothing's an aphrodisiac like, a good creative
yeah,
murder, right?
that's it. Yeah. But you're right. No, it is. And again, I bring this down to sort of like, Arnie isn't the best. Arnie doesn't have the best range. He's not a great dramatic actor. He needs to fill a certain niche, especially in this period. He's a bit better now. He's older, but um, it's that thing, isn't it? Like, if he is going to be that character, be that character. Sort of like, he's a soldier. Um, but there's almost like there's no reluctance to getting involved with the violence. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like he's reluctant to get involved with the rebels, the resistance, whatever you want to call it. But there's no reluctance to get involved really with the violence. I mean, he never really runs away from Sub-Zero. Like, he runs a bit, and then he's like, all right, well, I might as well just garrote him with this barbed wire.
Yeah.
Um, there's no real moment of like, yeah, you don't get the moment of contemplation, or where he's like, well, I've got,
I didn't
there
I
is no
didn't
other
want to
way
do
out of
this
this.
again. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
this is the
exactly.
one.
Like, um, yeah, having to sort of like use his skills in a way he doesn't want to use anymore. But I don't know. It very much sort of feels like, well, back on the wagon, off I
Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and having a scene like that would be good. I mean, and I think that tonally, I just, from that first scene, I don't get that this is a cartoon yet, right? I don't
Yeah.
get that character yet. And I think that, especially post, at this point we've had 20 years of James Bond murdering people and making quips about it, right?
Mm.
I mean, we're conditioned to see that as perfectly acceptable masculinity. It just doesn't, especially today, it doesn't feel like it quite fits with the goody two shoes, guy of the beginning, that is kind of in a different, more serious world, even if it's a one note, world, than the camp of the Running Man.
Oh, the characters. I agree with this because they were clearly filmed. I almost feel like, well, it has to be part of the story because it becomes that footage becomes a major part of the plot. But yeah, the Ben Richards that is in that helicopter is not the same Ben Richards that is sort of like making puns. Was seems now was Sub-Zero, now Plane Zero. Like it's not the same person. Because the character itself seems to go through a bit of a change, but like without saying, like, you see him as his soldier, and then he goes off and spends 18 months in prison. But even during the prison break, he's a bit more serious. There's a little bit of sort of slight humor juice, but he's still serious. It's not until he gets back to the rebels, when he says, I'm not a fighter, I'm a survivor. And he has that sort of like, there's a sort of a cockiness to him where he's sort of sat in the chair with the cigar.
Mm-hmm.
And he has that sort of scene. And I'm like, and that Ben Richards is who you see for the rest of the film. So there does definitely seem like a disconnect of character between that and the other. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I don't need, like, I find that whole escape sequence very, sort of hard to follow. The whole airport, thing is, I mean, I don't know. None of it is really that entertaining.
mm.
And it's sort of confusing to me. Sort of like, why am I getting this? Why am I following this? And then I think, where is the Running Man stuff I remember?
Yeah.
And everything I remember is that last hour.
Mm.
To me, this is like an hour-long movie.
Mm.
And if it starts with that dance number with the titles over it, I'm super, super happy with this movie. I'm a lot happier.
So let me throw something to you then, about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, when he is captured and he is taken to the studio and he's tidied up and he has something injected in him and he's sedated before he's sort of put onto stage, reminds me immensely of Escape from New York. I was thinking, like, this is Snake Plissken has been arrested, and you have some dialogue about what a badass he is, and there's been a bank robbery, and he was a former soldier, and da da da. And now he's been given a mission to go save the president, but he's got these explosives in his neck, and that takes like 10 minutes before he's on a sort of like he's on a sort of a jet or like a glider going over into New York, and that's it. And like you say, so none of that, like, explains everything. And then you get the information a little bit, like it's different because you want Snake Plissken to be a mysterious character. Like, you don't really get much about his past, other than everyone thinks he's dead. But it's the same thing. Like, you are getting that backstory in this film in order to sort of facilitate the sort of the Snake Plisskeniness of the sort of the being in the Running Man.
Yeah. I mean, and we'll do it someday, but I'm not, the biggest fan of, Escape from New York or in LA. But, I guess I just think, in retrospect, they're sort of different movies. We're talking about sort of like you're right about Arnie smoking the cigar. It's over the top and taking those explosives off there's so much information being thrown at you, like about the explosives, and so much happens, and none of it's really important.
No.
I mean, all that's important is he's a criminal who has a chance to be on the Running Man. That's all you really need. And I understand from a writing perspective how you'd want to have this material, right? The instinct is to have this material, but it's really not necessary. And I think the film would be stronger, if you just said, look, what we're doing is wrestling. Like, let's get to the wrestling. Let's get to over the top wrestling murder. Like
yeah,
wrestling
yeah,
murder is what we're doing, man, with some social satire thrown in. Spend that budget on a couple more fake commercials and another wrestler in costume, and we're all good, baby.
yeah. No, I know what you mean. Okay, what I would say is again, this is sort of a problem of Arnie's build. And what I mean is, obviously, in the book, and Stephen King has said, like Michael Biehn was very much his sort of, and I always agree with this, I haven't read the book, so I see it as being his Ben Richards, this very sort of like slight, sort of like smaller guy who has come from the have-nots and is doing the games as as a last-ditch effort to make some money for his wife and child. Like that's the point of the book. Like he's forced into this because they are starving. And so that's fine. If you want someone who is going to look skinny and sort of, maybe malnourished, like Michael Biehn can do that, and he still could look dangerous. Like if you've ever seen sort of like, some of his films, he can do that. The problem is Arnie's like 6'1", however much he weighs, it's sort of all muscle. He can't look like someone who's malnourished.
Right.
So you need to have that almost like a justification for his build in order for this thing to happen. So yes, well, you need like the military background or whatever. That's the thing they have to build in and say, okay, well, I've got to have that then, and so it builds to everything else. So again, it's solving a problem, I think, that doesn't need to be there, but there are ways around it. I know we rewrite. You could have that he's sort of, much like with Conan, where I wasn't this before, but I was on a wheel of pain for, however long, and it's made me this hugely muscular guy. I don't know, but you're right. It doesn't need to be as dense and as, whatever. You could introduce all the rebel parts of it later on, as they could be in the zone with him. And
Well, one of the things that really irritates me is when things are repeated. And then, as a writer, I think like, why weren't we in the same situation earlier? Why is this happening twice? Why is he captured and then escapes and is captured again? The whole escape sequence doesn't need to happen. He just needs to sign up for the Running Man. I mean, it seems to me
be signed up for it.
Right, which is what really happens.
Mm.
But, I think that to that point, all of those concerns that you are talking about are addressed by Killian saying, look at this guy.
Yeah.
He's would be awesome. Look at him running, he'd be awesome. Well, that's all you need is, the footage of his capture, and you see Killian looking at that footage and saying like, right, we need better ratings, this guy would be great, and you just have that. Well, that explains his physique. And they're like, well, most of these guys are such scrawny little criminals, because they're hungry, then you get some social commentary in there. You need to have more time to do that.
Yeah, and you could, I suppose the thing is as well, like you just by rearranging things, like you don't need a massacre because it could be the fact that like nobody believes him. Everybody knows him as the butcher of Bakersfield.
Right.
And he's constantly going like, I'm innocent, I didn't do it. And
right.
Eventually, like it's even as the viewer, you're never entirely sure because you see him being violent.
Right.
And it's not until the end that it's revealed that he didn't do it.
That's what I'm thinking,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that yeah, I mean, maybe that's not the film that Arnold would have wanted to be in at this point, but I do think that would have been a better film and far more efficient. I'm so confused by him committing this crime. Well, refusing to commit a crime and being captured. Right, that should be the setup for the movie, and then that should be it. Now, I mean, now we're starting the Running Man, and then we're in a prison camp, and it's like, okay, and now we're escaping the prison camp, and it's like, okay, and now he's fighting this woman, okay, and he's taking her hostage and going through an airport, okay, none of this is necessary. Get to the Running Man.
Yeah, that's the selling point. I mean, the one thing I would say as well, even from the very beginning, like you say about unnecessary, or because it weirdly takes its time, but also wants to rush things. Because, like for example, the scene of the massacre in that helicopter, you know, you get a voice come over the intercom, and it's like, you know, they're talking about the number of people, like 1,500 people, they're starving, blah blah, and the voice is like, "We don't care, kill them all," blah blah blah. And Arnie's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." How quick did the other people in that helicopter turn on him? Where I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I'm even thinking like, oh, there's a backstory here. Like he's not even liked on the army base. Like, you know, because the guy that hits him with a gun to knock him out, it's almost like they're not his friends or his colleagues. Like he seems completely disconnected from this group of people he's flying around with.
Yes.
And so that's always really weirded me out. That I'm like, is he just like is he just a pilot and these are separate soldiers, or are they part of like a unit? I don't know. It's so bizarre because, and clearly rushed, because the film that came out the same year, Predator. One of the things I love about that film is the fact that the group of people that Arnie and his troop feel like a unit. Like, you know, they have a history and they have that bonding that was done before filming that really pays off. And so yeah, I don't know, it has scenes that do that, doesn't it? It has scenes where it's sort of like this scene's not really necessary, but you're also rushing it to get the information out. So, you know, you're sort of losing on both sort of fronts.
Well, if you think about the first 30 minutes, you have a massacre that he is arrested for. Then
Yeah.
you have an escape attempt, establishing multiple new characters and new technologies. Then you join a rebellion, refuse to actually join them, but you see their underground base and everything. Then are trucked off, where you kidnap a woman, where the main character kidnaps a woman, decides in like, you know, a shot that takes 10 seconds to go to Hawaii, you know, which is what you usually do. And you know, goes through an airport. I mean, and then gets captured again, and then gets, you know, sort of drafted into the Running Man. That's like a whole movie's worth of plot that is rammed into 30 minutes.
It is.
And it's a different movie.
If this was a TV show, The Running Man happens in season 2.
Yeah. These days, with how things are spaced out. Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's like Westworld. Season 1 ends with they decide to revolt. You know, The Running Man. Season 1 ends with he's selected to be on The Running Man.
Yeah. And it was like, oh, I hope HBO continue with this show so we can actually see The Running Man. Yeah, I know. I think I agree with what you're saying, that I agree the vast majority of the first act is not needed. But it's sort of it's exposition heavy because there's so much that they have tried to fit into this rather straightforward plot, haven't they? Because they've got like Ben Richards' background, they're trying to build up his character, and then you've got this thing around the resistance and like the haves and have-nots, which, as you say, they don't really show a great deal of, but they do show like a camp where that's where he gets his collar removed. And also, what's interesting, when it goes to the show, they have the gambling going on, and that's clearly like an underground kind of thing. But some of the sort of, you know, the amounts of money that's being bandied around, like one guy's sort of like $200 on Ben Richards, and I'm like, in 1987, that you're meant to be a have-not, like, you know, surely this again, like, you know, change some of that so the gambling could actually be for food rations or like food stamps or something.
Well, in fairness, keep in mind that like one thing I really like is, did you notice that like the soda is $9?
Yes, I did see that. Yes,
right. So yeah, so
there is
$200
inflation.
is like 20 sodas.
Yes, that's true.
So that's not that much, but yeah,
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. You shouldn't feel like they have money.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right. There's an inflation thing that they are sort of hitting on and stuff, but
damn Democrats.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Well, I'll mention that later, but yeah, I think, like, you know, it's, again, this is that thing of like, this film's a couple of degrees away from being really cool. I feel a bit like this with Outland. You know what I mean? This is like an Outland where I'm like, yeah, there's bits of this really fail, but like I really like other bits. And unfortunately, because of the person they cast as the main character, like you have to go a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, here I don't know that. I mean, the truth is, if they had done a straight adaptation, it'd be a very different film. I mean, there's no way to imagine this. We can imagine Outland without Sean Connery,
Yeah.
and pretty easily, and it's it's hard to imagine that anyone else wouldn't have done better. But I agree with you. It's good enough that we imagine like, oh, parts of this are great. This could be really great. I think this is similar in that respect, but I can't imagine anyone but Arnold.
No.
I just want this to be closer to later Arnold, and it's so close to sort of full-fledged, high period Arnold, without quite getting there.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. It's almost there, and there's like some bits. There are just slight bits missing. But I also wonder, like you say, if again, this wasn't Paul Michael Glaser, if this was actually like the original director, would it be a different, a different film? I don't know how much the script was changed in that time between directors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I say it keeps alluding to a great film, and that's not to say it's a bad film, because I do really enjoy this film. But like you say, I often forget how sort of short the Running Man section actually is, because not only does it not, say it starts about the 30-minute mark, yeah, but then they escape, and it actually goes into like a rebel sort of an attack on the station, and so it's yes, at the end. So the finale isn't even part of the Running Man. It's on the station and stuff. And it obviously has the fake death of Ben Richards and all this other stuff. But like, it's not part of the game show.
Right. Yeah, at that point you're done with the wrestling supervillains part.
Yeah. And he never really has it. They tease that there's going to be a showdown because he has sort of Sven, what's his name, Olderson. I'm going to look for his mate, Sven Thorson, who is one of his bodybuilding chums, who ends up in a lot of his films, who's the sort of the Killian's bodyguard, and refuses.
Who walks off and doesn't like the steroid comment.
Yeah, I'm going to score some steroids, and leaves Killian to it. It sort of teases, but it feels like there should be like another showdown. Do you know what I mean? Because it ends up with Arnie just basically strapping Killian into the chair and firing him off. So that hit the mark. But it feels like there's a final confrontation that should happen between Arnie and one of the stalkers. And I kind of feel like it should be Captain Freedom.
Yeah. What even happens to him at the end?
Well, he just sort of leaves. He just walks out, and it's all about him. Because he makes that statement, doesn't he? Because he's looking at this poster of himself when he's obviously younger, and it's for a former UFC or some kind of fighting things, and he was like, "I was killing guys with my bare hands," and he has this whole thing about how the gimmicks are all crap, which is,
he hates the costume,
which everyone does. He has the worst costume. It's like, oh, someone's put a locker on him. Like, it looks bizarre. Hugely ineffective,
impractical.
Yeah, it's the worst. Anyway, I think
there was a G.I. Joe character who was like, I think he was just called Super Soldier.
Right.
He was like a mail-in guy, and he looks just like that, which is like a basically bare-chested, but with a hunk of metal strap. Like, that enhances you somehow.
Yeah, that's robotics.
Yes, that's what that is.
Yeah. $6 million man, just not as well refined. But I've always felt like there should have been like, he steps in just, like a tank top thing, and there needs to be a showdown between Arnie and Captain Freedom, and Captain Freedom's like, I'm gonna tear you apart, Richards. I don't need any of those gimmicks, just me and you, and there'd be a fight on the stage.
Yeah.
Like, and I always, Yeah, and I always feel like that's missing, and that would be a really cool, like, end fight.
Yeah.
That
No, you're right, and there's time for it,
mm,
in the running time, especially if we, get rid of some of this early stuff. Um, you know, you're right that Killian's death feels, I say his death, but um, feels abrupt. I love that he's strapped into the machine and sort of sent into the set, but then that's just shooting him down the pipe.
yeah.
Um, and in fact, I have a lot of my logistical questions about this have to do with that pipe. Um, and like the net at the end, if you've ever been to like a fun park or whatever,
Hmm.
everybody clears that net at the end. This is a big deal. There's a guy right behind you with a rocket sled. He's clearly going to rear end you. Yet when he comes crashing in, the net is totally removed and prepped for the next guy.
Mm.
And then I guess it's just not there for Killian at the end, so he goes flying off and into a billboard. Basically, why do you have this long pipe? I guess to go to the other set. To
Well, it's
like
not
leave
because
the
yeah,
skyscraper.
it's not a set, is it? Because that's the thing as well. The
Yeah.
Running Man's zone is the site of like a rubble set site from an earthquake that's never been
Mm.
repaired. Like it's a demolished zone um, that's now
So
just been left to its own devices.
so are they like they're like in a skyscraper
Yes,
on a set, and so then they are put into tubes that shoot them through the entire rest of the skyscraper,
and
like down like 40 stories or something into, the surrounding area, underground and
underground.
back
Yeah,
up,
yeah.
until they're yeah. I want to see more of, like, I want to see a sideways schematic of that or some shit, like, yeah, I mean, and you're right about the way in which this feels like a set. This
Yeah.
feels sort of like flat, that there isn't that sense of space. Um,
No, and that's sort of because of that, because they sort of, and there's obviously budgetary restraints, special effects restraints of the time. That's fine, but because of that, they keep showing these small spaces, and so but they have to keep telling you, oh, there's 400 square blocks. I'm going, that's a big space. That's a large
yeah,
space.
it's a
We see,
city, that is.
yeah, we see about 30 feet, like, because it's just this weird little, yeah, it never feels like they're traveling or
Hmm.
and again referencing sort of Escape from New York, but there's been other films that have done it where you choose somewhere to film that would be on location that you then sort of show them having to do things. I mean, are people living in these ruins, like Mad Max style or Escape from New York? Like, is it, or is it completely deserted and they're just being hunted down by the stalkers? I don't know, but I'd want to see more of this. I mean, you saying you want to expand on this section. That's what I would do. I'd introduce almost like a feral population that still live in these ruins, that they've got to cope with that as well. Not just the runners, but the stalkers. The reason this is a contact sport and the stalkers have got to be so badass is like, not only they've got to hunt these people down, but they've got to survive
Mm.
this zone as well. And
Yeah,
so
they're
that,
being sent into the no man's land,
yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah. Like there is a real danger to this. Like, it's not just Ben Richards being being this badass. It's actually surviving out in this zone is dangerous. Um,
Well, I mean, I was thinking about how well Logan's Run communicates the
mm,
travel. And travel and going from one zone to another is always something that I think needs to be shown, right? It's something that I'm always irritated, if they're like, "Why, we'll go here." I always need to see it.
well, we've said that with
Um,
Star Wars, haven't we? When they're like,
mm,
we're now going to go to this planet. Whoop, we're there, and like,
yeah.
so yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
Um,
and also like, the feral kids in Logan's Run. You're suggesting let's have a bit of that here.
mm,
Let's have a bit of, I mean, I think you have these motorcyclists Who are they? Are they employed by the game?
I don't know. I
They seem
thought
to
that
be
before.
harassing
Yeah.
the runners, and then there are these audience members, at least still at that point, right, in this sort of entrance to the bombed out, the earthquake destroyed area, who are throwing things, cans at them and stuff. I quite like that,
Mm.
but where are they? Like, are they like, right, let's go to the atomic wasteland? I know that that's not literally true, but
But that's it. But that's the point, isn't it? Like you say, there's this sort of, it hints at this thing of like I said, this entranceway to this area, and then all of a sudden it's just massively unpopulated. It's like, well, like you said, yeah, you're right. I've always wondered that. Like, do they because they work? They seem to be doing a job. They like you said, they clear the net. They seem to do something. Then you got this biker gang, and I'm like, oh, are they part and parcel of like the show? Is this part of? Do they work for the station? Do they go home at the end of the day? Yeah, I don't know. It feels like it shouldn't. It feels like it should be. They're just shot out into this no man's land, and that's it. Like they've got to survive. And that should even be part of the game. Like the stalkers get a bonus if they're the ones to kill the runners, which is what motivates them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I realized watching this is that all you need to start a revolution is just to have a game show contestant that wins a lot. You know, um, all society will rally behind them.
Yeah. Well, I say it makes Family
If it's Arnie.
Fortunes. It makes Family Feud be a very different show if this. Uh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think of all the near revolutions American Gladiators caused. I mean,
This comes to another point. Actually, we've always said this, and I wanted to get to this point. I'm sort of looking at the time because we talk about this, and I don't want this to slide because of it's been an Arnie film, and I like it. But this also suffers from the same thing as Logan's Run, and these many other sort of like dystopian toppling movies. So they kill Killian, they bring down the Running Man, and they have fired out the truth into the world, allegedly. Where does this film go? Because is this becoming like is this like an ongoing running battle now with the government? Because just because you've shown the truth, like doesn't mean the people rise up. The level of apathy we've already seen that they're willing to accept anything that they're told. So I don't know. It just the ending of this is it
I'm
fulfills.
less bothered by it here than in Logan's Run.
Oh yeah,
right?
Logan's Run is a complete disaster because it's sort of like
Yeah. Well, you can't go back, right? I mean, I love the ending of this movie with the watching the TV screen and seeing, first of all, this completely sells like the kiss and going off as the music swells. Like it's so 80s. And I'm so like, yeah, that male hero who's been violent gets the girl. That is the logic of this universe, and I was brought up in that logic, and it makes complete sense to my, reptilian brain. But then you see that framed now by, it's on a screen in an environment, a sort of dystopian environment with a mob, and they say experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. And I love that message. I love that shot, and I love that message. And that to me is sort of like at least nodding to what you're saying and that we often talk about, right? Like we don't know what the sequel is. Please stand by, right? We don't know how the society is going to evolve. I mean, my big objection is less that how the hell did they edit this video in that amount of time, right? Instead of just playing the truth. So yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like obviously the Running Man show is kaput. There was already revolutionaries. Maybe they'll be encouraged by this and there'll be more. But I don't feel like society is about to collapse. I feel like that show is about to collapse. Oh, and we found out Killian was very corrupt, and they doctored evidence. We're shocked and appalled that they would do
Exactly.
this. That's
Yeah.
the end, right? I mean,
This is what I'm saying about them finding a scapegoat, because this goes back to the beginning. Like, they find a scapegoat. Ben Richards was the original scapegoat. Killian now becomes the next scapegoat. He's dead, so he can't defend himself, whatever. So he gets thrown under the bus to cover the rest of the network. Life carries on as normal.
right. Well, that's what's going to happen. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that the movie kind of wants you to believe that the Running Man is central to this entire civilization, right? It's a little like a sort of like Rick and Morty alien planet or something,
Yeah.
where, a little simplistic. Um, yeah, and that somehow with it being toppled, then, people are going to go like, well, no more bread and circuses. We've got to question what the government's doing now. It doesn't really say that, but it kind of implies that. And yeah, I don't think you and I buy that.
No. What I would say is, and this I do spoilers ahead, because I do want to touch on the end of the novel and how it varies.
Please.
If you don't mind the
No,
spoilers.
go for it. Take
So
your time.
Richards in the novel says is a much smaller person, and he's not this sort of fighter. He ends up getting into a battle, and he gets a bit sort of he gets injured, and he ends up hijacking a plane, like a 747, and clearing the plane and sort of like forcing it to take off, and sort of like he's trying to escape. But in the battle, he ends up basically getting disemboweled. Like he gets injured to the extent where he's literally holding his guts in. And he's able to he gives them a destination, and then he takes over the plane and just basically puts the plane into a dive. Like, you got to accept certain things. It's a dark adventure. But what he does, and this is why I don't think we'll have this on screen, is he flies that plane into the skyscraper where the network is.
Mm-hmm.
And kills Killian. I mean, there's a great moment where Killian looks out the window and he actually says, like, it passes through his head. He swears he can see Ben Richards, and Ben Richards is giving him the finger, and like that's sort of the end of the story. And you reading it when I did in the 90s, I'm like, cool. Reading it now, I'm like, oof, not sure a plane hijacking and it being flown into a building is going to make it onto TV.
Well, that's not the problem, right? I mean, that is a problem.
That's one
the real
problem.
is that the guy doing it is the hero,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's the central issue. And of course, if we didn't have the same relationship to heroes and protagonists that comes out in Arnie needing to be, the hero, we would be able to tolerate that and have a discussion about that. In the same way that like Dark Knight Strikes Again, as Batman saying, "Oh yeah, I'm a terrorist. I've always been a terrorist." We can have these discussions, but we're not willing to. I think because of our whole relationship to what is a hero, what's a protagonist. That movie's not getting made. I mean,
no. Well, it does have the thing. I think the movie might not made, but I think you could have it as a TV series, because the reason he goes all out is he finds out that his wife and child have died. They've actually died of an illness, and his wife is then a bit like what they do to Amber in this, where they present this whole story about who she is. They do the same to his wife, and so it's almost like a revenge plot. But I'm thinking of, like, as I say, I'm currently watching The Walking Dead, but there's been others like this is Breaking Bad, or like that sort of like good people doing bad things, but always, like you say, this thing of the protagonist. I think we can even, like, say, Game of Thrones or other shows that have done this relatively well, where you're willing to accept that certain people will do certain bad things, and you can sort of you're less that you're rooting for them, but you sort of understand where they're going, and they're people, they're complex. You can do that, I think, better in a TV show than you can a film, maybe. I don't know. Like, it wouldn't be a big blockbuster mainstream film. I think you'd have to try and be a bit more. I don't know. Maybe streaming could do it, but you're right. I don't think you'd have that now.
I mean, maybe eventually we could. I just think that's so much of what we've talked about over the years in terms of like why I really hate Tony Stark,
Mm.
like he's the bad guy. I really hate these superheroes who just endanger and murder tons of people and are still presented with swelling music and glorious shots, and we're clearly supposed to just not just love them but worship them. um and I think this whole sort of sickness,
Yeah.
uh there is a sickness behind all of this that you can't do that version of the story.
No, no, not anymore. Oh no, not now. Maybe.
Yeah,
But I do think it's
before
worth.
we die, we'll get it.
Yes,
We'll
maybe,
be in the old folks' homes,
and we'll
going,
finally
finally
see. Yeah.
the true version.
I mean, I wonder if I'm thinking now. Because you say about this. I mean, you wouldn't get it in a superhero film. You're right that sort of like the superhero genre has made them heroic. Heroic to be the sort of like they can't do certain things, or they have to do it, but it has to be in a certain way. But then, like you said, they have to be presented in a certain way. I'm trying to think if has there ever been, has Arnie or Stallone or any of those done a film where they'd done that heroic thing, but had that, I don't say downbeat, but done the things that you're like, oof, I'm not sure the hero would do that. I don't know. I can't think of any at the moment. Rambo probably, but again, that's sort of like a different. The first one, I suppose, but that's a very different kind of film. Yeah, it's a different thing. The '80s very, very much established an archetype of a hero, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but that hero is that 80s hero is capable of unleashing massive amounts of violence,
Yes,
massive amounts of and being
praised for
absolutely
it.
sociopathic.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the sociopathy that really is unique, right? The
Yes.
smiling, there's no trauma. It's the opposite of Rambo, right? That's why Rambo couldn't stay Rambo.
Mm,
He's got to revert to sociopathy
hmm.
because the 80s demand sociopathy of the male, right?
Yes.
Masculinity has to be absolutely sociopathic. If you show emotion or weakness other than, you know,
Aggression.
yeah, right, you're,
Weak.
unacceptable.
Yeah. But to touch on that, this idea of sociopathy and this idea of heroes, because in this idea, this creation of the hero type, I think the '80s hero type, the sort of the good guy, violent. We get it's a sort of a softening of a character because you say we talk about John Rambo in sort of like First Blood, but also like I would say Dirty Harry, like the Dirty Harry of the first film is pretty different to the Dirty Harry of the rest of the films, because the Dirty Harry of the first film is very much sort of like not a villain, but like he isn't a good guy, and then they
Hmm.
want to they sort of translate him to become a bit more of a oh he's a rogue, he's a loose cannon and all that kind of stuff, um, and so yeah, you get sort of a softening of Harry Callahan over the films. And I think this is that thing, isn't it? Like the '80s required you to be brusque, stoic, um, saying one-liners and stuff, but also willing, able, and happy to kill left, right, and center. Um, for the greater good. Um, so yeah,
Well, I mean, that's what a man does. He protects his family by going house to house in his neighborhood and slaughtering his neighbors in inventive ways. I mean,
yeah, no, that's why the village around here is very quiet. It's
yeah, well, you learn the techniques as a wrestler, and
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, you've got the gimmick costume.
I
There's been a
do.
slate of bizarre murders.
I basically stalk the streets in lycra every night, hunting down people that are sort of. It's like the Purge, but a bit more camp because I'm sort of singing opera whilst I do it.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, that sounds Marvel. I want to watch that movie.
yeah,
And here again we have the disconnect between like movies and real life, right? What
yes,
we, I vicariously enjoy, versus, in real life it'd be like, oh man, and to that point, I joke that it totally makes sense to me that he gets the girl, and
Hmm.
she's like, I misjudged you, right? Okay, let's be clear. He still straight up kidnaps her, steals her money and
Yeah.
her stuff, terrifies her. There's an implied rape, like he has not raped her, but he has pushed her to back and
Hmm.
clearly shown like I could rape you if I want, right?
Well, even one of
You
her
know,
colleagues acknowledges that, like he could have
mm,
raped you and killed you, or killed you and raped you, and like it's almost done as a joke. I'm just like, oof,
yeah.
like that's not gone down well.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine today, like, right, okay, so back up. You've fallen in love with a man who kidnapped you, and
Yeah.
that you were terrified as you went through that airport, right? Like, there's no point at which you were not in abject terror. And
Hmm.
now you're like, oh, but he had a good reason for it, didn't he? I'd like to have a future with that guy. I mean, this is not psychologically correct,
No,
let
but it's
alone
but it's
socially
film.
correct.
It's film heroically correct, isn't it? That's what you're
Exactly.
saying. Yes.
Right, and that's part of that disease.
Mm. The thing is, I say we went through this period doing this. I mean, this is still this is typified by all the sort of the Saturday morning cartoons that we watched as well. Everything from He-Man to Transformers to um, G.I. Joe and all those Saturday morning cartoons about those sorts of heroes. They were better. This is why you end up being able to have a RoboCop and a Rambo cartoon, because they just fit into that mold. Um, but it's a weird transition because you've also got, and it's not linked with this, but in this mold is the vigilante movie. We're
Mm.
talking about sort of Charles Bronson in Death Wish, and there's one just called, I think, called Vigilante. No, The Executioner. Um, and you get
Great.
those. Oh yeah, it is kind of good though, to be fair. But you get these sort of these vigilante movies again, and it's sort of we've had to sort of not dismantle them, but they've been deconstructed, and I think this is the problem. Like in when you sort of when you deconstruct these films and
Mm.
these tropes, you take away the fun. Sounds like the wrong thing to say, but like once you remove the sort of the camp elements of it being silly and knowing that it's silly, and it's glorification of gore and all this other stuff, and you make it real and you deconstruct it, you can't, like you said, it's really difficult to go back to
Go back
the
to what? To enjoying it?
yeah, it's just difficult to explain. um
This is a kill to dissect, right?
exactly, yes.
Yeah, see,
um
I don't agree with that anymore. I mean, I feel like, look, I mean, we're talking about it now
yeah,
with
yeah.
the Running Man, right? But the Running Man is totally enjoyable. I could totally enjoy, this movie. I can enjoy RoboCop. I'm also utterly aware that they screwed me up. You know, like I was not a better man because I watched Arnold Schwarzenegger
Mm.
movies in the 80s and 90s. I mean,
No,
you know,
true. But is it a generational thing? You and I grew up on these things and watched them probably earlier than we really should have done, um, from a developmental or a sort of any psychological point of view. But is there a generation now that's gone through the deconstruction of these heroes and this other stuff that can't go back to these? They look at them and acknowledge, and all they see them is silly and absurd, and I don't know, because they are
uh,
taken out of the era and out of context. Do they no longer work?
yeah, I think I don't know. And I think it probably is on a case by case basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you and I can go back to stuff from the 50s and be
Mm.
like, "Oh, this is cringe, this is
Mm-hmm.
this is not working." But then other stuff we're like, "Oh, that's perfectly charming. It works for me." And I think in much the same way that like um I've had black friends who said I can't read Will Eisner's The Spirit. um
Mm.
you know its racial stereotypes are just too much for me, and it's like my first instinct is like, what racial stereotypes? And then
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, that totally Stefan
Yes.
Fetchit sort
Yeah.
of horrible character. But I don't even that's not even the first thing that comes to mind, because I'm thinking of like Will Eisner's shots and whatever, but I have the privilege that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to affect me. um I can imagine a woman watching the Running Man, a woman who's 20 years old watching the Running Man and saying, "This is some toxic masculine shit," and the two
Yeah,
of us going like, our first instinct is like, "What are you talking about?
yeah.
It's good fun," But that doesn't mean she's not right, and that
No, no,
doesn't
no.
mean
Yeah.
that another 20-year-old woman couldn't say, "Oh, that's absolutely true," but I still enjoy it.
Mm.
I think individual variation is greater than the generalization.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. That's a very, very good point. I think, and I think really that films of this era, and I'd say from like 85, 86 through to about 93, 94, there's a window there that sort of hits that stride of being, I think, very fun and very open. But like I say, they hit that gore window of the special effects have hit a mark where you can do the sort of really good physical gore and you can be over the top. I mean, again, I think Total Recall is a really good example of it, of that use of sort of practical effects and and stuff. And you could watch that, and it hits that Verhoeven mark, doesn't it, of being just silly enough, but also being actually a really we'll definitely do that one day. So yeah, and then I think there was like a bit of a rebuke to it. Like I think there was a pushback, and we lost some of that, I think. But it's you go back to them now, and I think people can watch them and go, "Oh, this is ridiculous! Like, that's so silly."
Mm.
But you're right. You and I will go back and go, "No, it's a loads of fun!" Like buckets of blood were used, and sort of see it. And I think you see it from different contexts. So I'd even be interested from listeners. What generation are you, and where do you stand on this kind of thing, on these 80s violence and sort of the cartoonish nature of it?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think we love sex and violence,
Mm-hmm.
and I love sex and violence. Um, that doesn't mean that I'm not open to interrogating it, and that doesn't mean that. I mean, for me, it's important to be able to say I could still enjoy these movies and also understand that I'm implicated. I think that you know, uh, we have societies, especially in the States, where, if you say, like, that's racist, oh, well, I can't possibly like a movie that's racist. No, tons of stuff is racist, right? I mean, that we love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that doesn't mean that we love it because it's racist. Hopefully, we love it despite, but that's hard to disentangle, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And we can understand that we're implicated and still say I like it. And that doesn't mean that I'm a racist and a terrible person and a sexist. And you know, our deconstructing this stuff doesn't have to mean like I can't enjoy this movie anymore. No, enjoy the movie. You know, I mean, I can enjoy this movie and still say like, yeah, there's a part of my reptilian brain that is
Yeah.
still like, you know what? I've done good in my life. I've helped a lot of people. I'm a great teacher. I went to Ferguson. I'm a great guy. Like, I got my PhD and I wrote a lot of books. Where's my trophy woman who doesn't care if I
Yeah.
kidnap her? Like, and that's totally irrational. That's dumb of me. It is sexist and it's terrible. But I know where that came from. I know
Mm-hmm.
where the idea that like sex and women should be commodified. It should be a reward for being a good guy, right? I mean, I came from a culture that taught me that. And I've had to deprogram myself, but the fact that I can recognize that this movie re-cements that or is part of that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy it at the same time.
No,
I
true.
just bracket it a little,
I
and
think
that's okay.
I like that bracketing it. I think that's the point, isn't it? You got to bracket it and say, well, here's despite because you say about them female thing, and one of the things that just clicked in my head as you're saying that. You talked about the final shot and how you completely accept it, but you've also sort of said that there's a slightly rapey overtone to the relationship. When the two of them kiss at the end and then they walk off, and so I saw someone point this out many years ago, and I just remembered it. He doesn't put his arm around her and hold her around her. He literally grabs like that. He has his hand around the back of her neck. Like, and
Uh-huh.
she's and you know, the actress Maria Conchita Alonso. She's not a large woman. Like, she's not tall. She's very sort of relatively petite woman compared to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, it looks like he is re-kidnapping her. Basically, he's sort of like, you know, he's basically, come with me or I'll snap your neck. Sort of like,
Right. That's a very good point because I was disturbed by the kidnapping scene in the airport.
mm,
Um, that how he has his big hand around her neck,
mm,
and that's how he's sort of steering her.
yeah,
And you see people looking at them, and you think like, flash the sign for "I'm in trouble," right? Um, which we should all learn, and
mm,
but it's kind of a horrifying scene. And you think then also, like, why is it socially acceptable to be like holding your quote unquote wife, your woman, your girlfriend by her neck?
yeah,
Like, that's doesn't stand out at all in a crowd. But the fact that that was Arnold's way of, you know, holding her, right? At
mhm,
least at this time. And Arnold has talked about his sexism and the way he
yeah,
objectified women in this era, and you know, he's come a long way. And I think been, a good beacon to a lot of men who followed him and thought, he
mm,
looks great. I should be that manly man. Um, so we can learn from the past, but that's a very good point about that. That is super creepy.
yeah. It ends on a really creepy note, but yes. Anyway, I think we have sort of run to time, and we've talked
Mm.
The Running Man. Any final thoughts?
My final thought is, in a film that we've talked about its sort of misogynistic uh, background or whatever, there are, like Sin City. It's interesting to me how sometimes the most misogynistic or sort of tough guy sort of visions of the world also love to hurt men in the most sexual way possible.
Yeah,
There are three separate crotch hits, all to men, one with a chainsaw to the crotch, another with a flare to Fireball's crotch that
yeah.
starts the explosion, and then the woman kicks Dynamo in the crotch before he
Well,
tries to rape her.
but and then four actually, because Amber also punches Ben Richards in the nuts when she escapes from him in the airport.
Oh, right, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, this movie. Just remember, guys,
Hmm.
the most macho societies, while they commodify women, also love destroying the penis.
Yes. Yeah. It is. It's yeah. Or at least put it under great duress. Because if you can carry on afterwards, then you're a real man.
Hmm.
Actually, if you want to put it that way, and you want to be really weird about it, the nut shots or the sort of groin shots to the three villains result in their death,
Hmm.
whilst Ben Richards continues after his because he's a hero. So
Hmm.
he can take a shot to the nuts and carry on going, just like the Energizer Bunny.
Writing an essay.
Yeah, about testicular shots in action films. um, but yeah, mine is similar. I do enjoy this film. It's been I've watched this a number of times over the years. It's one of those I do go back to. It's one of those Arnie films I think I do enjoy, but I do acknowledge that it has flaws. And it's one of those weird films. And again, we've talked about this with a few films now we've sort of had this season. It's a couple of degrees off being really good. And I think we sort of said that was like the theme of the first half of this season was like, this film's a couple of degrees off being really good. It could have been this, could have been that. This is almost like, it's not, I wouldn't say this is a Verhoeven wannabe. I mean, it came out the same year as RoboCop. There was clearly something in the air
Hmm.
in 86, 87. But this feels like, yeah, Verhoeven light. Like, there's the adverts and the sort of other TV shows, Climb for Money, the guy being attacked by the dogs, and the fans in the audience sort of getting to pick their favorite, and the old woman picking Ben Richards for the next kill. He's a mean motherfucker. Like, all that sort of is great. I like that stuff. But like you say, the Running Man stuff is the best bit. the more you talk about it, the more you're like, yeah, that's where the fun is, that's where the action is. More of that, less of the other stuff would have been really, really good. But it clearly gets bogged down in its own need to justify certain things. So yeah, no, I would love one day to see a closer adaptation of the book, which is darker. But at the moment, I think if anything, I'd like this to go the other way and be more camp and more sort of satirical and more violent. I think would have been much, much better. But yes,
No, I agree with all of that. Yeah. And let's have add that final confrontation. I mean,
yes,
there's almost like a re-edit of this with some lost footage, possibly, that could be like a lot better.
Yeah. Well, weirdly, one of the other reasons I think there should be that fight is because that's the fight that they had to fake. You've already had the confrontation. You've had a fake confrontation between Captain Freedom and Ben Richards, so you should be allowed to be given the real one as well, sort of.
This won't go like in the video.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there's another pun I can sort of think of. Yeah.
Well, and in terms of the how
Take
this is
two,
prognostic,
something like that.
yeah, there you go. How this is prognostic. That's deep fakes, right?
Yes.
I mean, that took 40 years, but that's where we are.
Yeah, the technology's there for deep fakes, and this also covers things like fake news and what would they call it? Alternative facts. There's an essay for that as well in here, sort of talking about the media manipulation of facts and a game show host. I mean, if you really wanted, like a game show host being involved in the government, you can make all kinds of connections to where we're at the moment.
Well, and let's also point out, both Ventura and Schwarzenegger went on to become governors.
Yes, they did.
Right? I mean, there were two future governors in a movie about how celebrities with muscles, and gimmicks, have too much influence over the government.
Yes, yeah. I wonder if that was both men, are, I think, extremely intelligent, but probably were never savvy enough to think that's a point we should probably. Well, actually, no, because when he ran for governor, he obviously used, he was the governator. But I have a feeling that he used some of those sort of slogans and stuff from this as well. So yeah, he was completely unaware of the sort of the satire and the prognostication of that. So yes. Anyway, there we are. We've talked. I'm still thinking this might be our first Arnie film. We've done sort of Stallone. Now we've done Arnie. At some point, we'll do Van Damme and some of the others. Maybe Time Cop. I'll really push the boat out. I'll really push Julian's buttons with a time travel film that makes absolutely no sense of its time travel. So yes, but we are not done with dystopian futures. We've got a few sort of coming up. And we've had satirical media messaging in this film. Now we're going to be having an eco message dystopian future. Next, we're going to be talking about Kevin Costner's film Waterworld from 1995, the epic flop that's ruined his career. We are going to be reconsidering it, I think, and whether or not it stands up, we shall see.
Yeah, we'll see. I do think this is the first Arnie film. Looking at
yeah. So it is indeed. Then, if it is, it's the first Arnie film, which then means, I say, we need to be doing the others. We've done some Stallone. We've done Arnie. I think, yeah, Van Damme. Van Damme next. I'm going to try and Universal Soldier.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I'll watch Waterworld, but I got to draw the line somewhere, man. Oh geez, I remember that.
Yeah.
God. Watching Van Damme, like, my brother's really into bad action movies. So he has like all of the he has like all of the straight to video horrible stuff that these guys did after the fact. Who's the guy who was in Under Siege?
Steven Seagal.
Oh, my
Yeah.
brother has all the straight-to-video Steven Seagal stuff.
Oh,
It's all horrible beyond belief.
Yeah,
Like, it's
Steven
so
Seagal.
bad.
Steven Seagal is one of the laziest sort of action fighters. Oh, it's amazing. However,
Like,
I
some
would
of those
say
cuts.
yes. What I would say is there is a tangential way of bringing Van Damme into not this season, but in the season. We are doing a sequel to Blade Runner this season,
that's
Blade
right.
Runner 2049. Before that was discussed, another script was touted as a sequel to potentially it was meant to be a sequel as a number of films, including He-Man, by Canon Film. It was eventually made by Canon Film. Replicant, but I think no Cyborg. Sorry, Cyborg.
I thought it was Soldier.
No, Soldier is
was
that's the Kurt Russell one. But the Cyborg that features Jean-Claude Van Damme was a what's it script that was then going to be
spec script.
Sorry, that was being touted as a potential sequel to a number of films, and Blade Runner was one of those. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've made you watch, slow motion torture from abroad and whatever. I mean, I guess you can make me watch a Van Damme film. I've never seen a Van Damme film I've ever enjoyed.
Let's see how Hard to Be a God goes, and then I'll make a decision for next season.
Well, I'm down. I'll watch anything.
I could do a double header because we could do Universal Soldier, which is both Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. So we shall see. Anyway, we're off on a tangent. So for next episode, we were doing Waterworld. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we're doing, please leave a review on your podcast catcher. And don't forget, we have a Patreon, and you can help keep the lights on and keep us doing more and more stuff. We are getting into the 2023 now, and we've got so much more stuff coming, and we're going to have some hopefully have some announcements coming soon for more stuff that we've got coming up. So keep your ears open. We've got new episodes coming, but yes, all exciting stuff. But Julian, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation.
It's my honor, and it's great to be able to discuss The Running Man with an expert.
Yes, yeah, this is my sort of area of expertise, is these ridiculous action films of the 80s. But there will be more. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.